Hello again, everyone. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, so we are going to get started. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Our Take, Inclusion Canada's Position on Housing. Before we begin, we would like to run through some housekeeping and accessibility items with you. Today's event will be 1 hour long, with approximately 40 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes for questions and answers. This event will be presented in English, French simultaneous interpretation, ASL and LSQ, and English and French card captioning are also provided. To turn on English or French card captioning, please click the link provided in the chat box. The card captions will appear in a new window. Using the toolbar along the top of the window, you can adjust the caption size, font style, and color. You can also change the background color. In the upper left, you can switch back and forth between English and French card captioning. To turn on French simultaneous interpretation, please go to the toolbar along the bottom of your screen and click the arrow next to the interpretation button. An options menu will appear. Click French. You will now be able to hear the French interpreter, as well as the original audio at a much lower level. If you prefer to remove the original English audio, click the interpretation button again and select Mute Original Audio. You will now hear the French interpreter only. Pour obtenir l'interprétation simultanée en français, cliquez sur la flèche située près de la touche Interprétation. Sur la barre d'outils au bas de l'écran, puis cliquez sur Français, French. Sur le menu qui apparaîtra à l'écran, vous pourrez désormais entendre l'interprète français ainsi que l'audio initial qui aura un plus faible volume. Si vous préférez supprimer le son de l'audio initial en anglais, cliquez à nouveau sur la touche Interprétation et choisissez Couper le son de l'audio original, Mute Original Audio. À présent, vous n'entendrez plus que l'interprète en français. We are also pleased to have American Sign Language and Langue des Signes du Québec interpreters with us today. ASL and LSQ interpreters have been spotlighted. They will be visible on your screen at all times. If you are not able to see the interpreter, please check that your Zoom window is set to gallery view. There will be a question and answer at the end of the event. You can submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We understand that the Q&A box may not be an accessible format for everyone, so questions can also be submitted to forum@inclusioncanada.ca. Because of the large number of people participating in today's webinar, it may not be possible to respond to all questions. If you have technical difficulties, please let us know by email at forum@inclusioncanada.ca, and we will do our best to help you resolve them. To avoid common issues, please make sure you are watching the webinar from a location with a strong internet connection and that your computer's volume is turned on. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, First Nations people, and the chosen home of the Métis.
Hello, and welcome to Inclusion Canada's webinar series, Our Take. My name is Krista Carr, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Inclusion Canada. Inclusion Canada is a national federation of 13 provincial territorial associations and over 300 local associations working to advance the full inclusion and human rights of people who have an intellectual disability and their families. Today's event is the last in a three-part series exploring Inclusion Canada's recently updated position statements. Today's webinar will explore Inclusion Canada's position on housing. Access to inclusive, affordable housing is a hot topic across the country. Inadequate housing is an issue impacting more than 1 million households in Canada, including people with an intellectual disability. Thank you for being with us today as we explore this important issue and discuss steps towards making positive change.
It's now my pleasure to introduce you to your hosts for the day. My name is Rachel Mills. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst working at Inclusion Canada, and I will be your moderator for the day. Jeff Ferguson is the Executive Director, Knowledge Mobilization and Transformation with Inclusion Canada. Norm MacLeod is co-chair of the Joint Task Force on Deinstitutionalization, a joint task force between Inclusion Canada and People First of Canada. Diane Cormier-Northrup is a parent as well as a director at large on Inclusion Canada's board. To begin our presentation, I'd like to pass it over to Jeff to tell us a little bit about the issue with housing in Canada.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And I just would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'll just say that I am a white male. I have short, black, gray hair showing. I'm wearing a pair of glasses today, and I have a blue, sort of baby blue short sleeve shirt with a white shirt underneath. My background is blurred from the Zoom option, and my pronouns are he and him. So thanks again, Rachel, for the introduction. What is the issue with housing? Well, it's obviously remains a big priority policy area for Inclusion Canada that has several elements to it. But first, let's talk about home for a minute. Home is a universal and basic human need. While housing varies across the world, the meaning of home is constant. It's the place where we experience love as a child, grow, and go out into the world. Eventually, we create a home of our own that reflects who we are as a unique individual person. Yet, for too many people with intellectual disabilities, the true essence of home has been denied by placing them in congregated and segregated facilities or housing, such as institutions and group homes. Places not individually chosen as a home of one's own, but rather placements which create barriers to choice, freedom, and full participation in community. Access to safe, affordable, accessible, and inclusive housing remains a top priority area for Inclusion Canada, as well as our federation. People with intellectual disabilities have the same rights to a home as everyone else. This includes the right to choose where and with whom to live, the right to own or rent a home, and the right to create a personal home environment where choices, possessions, and privacy are respected. These rights are spelled out in Article 19 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Finding a place to live for people with an intellectual disability can be at times very difficult. People are often placed in housing that is away from the rest of society, in segregated and congregated housing, and in some cases within an institution. Many people with an intellectual disability can't afford to get a good place to live. They can't afford suitable housing even when it is available. They have high rates of poverty. A 2016 Statistics Canada study found that 25% of people with disabilities live in unaffordable housing. Unaffordable means when people in a home spend more than 30% of their individual income on shelter. We also know that when we look at statistics for people with intellectual disabilities, they usually have higher rates of unaffordability compared to persons who have other disabilities. But also, in addition, we have seen within the last year that affordability has become even less so given inflation, interest rates, and the dramatic increase in rent. And also we're seeing rent evictions, where landlords decide to renovate their buildings and evict lower income people and price them out of affordable rent. We also know very well that it is difficult for people with intellectual disabilities to have the supports to live independently. Disability services and supports are not the same across the country. It's also most often seen as an exception to obtain independent person-centered planning. As well, families want their family members to be safe. They want them to have their needs met too. Too often, people with an intellectual disability are placed in a living situation. It may be because it's the only so-called safe option in the community where they can get their needs met. Families do not want to put their loved ones in these places, but they're forced to because in many cases, there are no other choices or options. There is no personal control in many housing models. Group homes do not allow for personal control. They do not allow for choice and decision making. And people with an intellectual disability are placed in these models. Housing should be accessible. Housing should allow for the full inclusion in community. People must be directly involved. They must help plan and choose their housing and support services. We advocate for funding to move with the person, meaning where you decide to live, your funding should follow. Next slide, please. In many provinces and territories in Canada, current housing options for people with intellectual disabilities are limited. People are often placed together in the same housing. Some examples include large institutions, nursing and senior homes, special care and personal care homes, rehabilitation centers, other institutional settings. Some people rent or own their own apartment, condo, or house. They may live independently or with support. And unfortunately, people with intellectual disability who want to live in their own homes most times are prevented from doing so. Even in situations where affordability and accessible housing is available, higher rates of poverty and lack of supports make a home in a community unattainable for many people with intellectual disabilities. But we also know many can and do find ways of creating inclusive housing. We have several resources on our website, which we'll point out later on, where we've demonstrated various examples of successful approaches. You'll actually hear from Diane on her family's personal situation a bit later in creating just that. So next, we'll discuss institutionalization. I would like to turn it over to Norm MacLeod, one of our chairs of the Joint Inclusion Canada People First Deinstitutionalization Task Force. And that is a fairly long name for a very important group of people. So we'll ask Norm to provide more information, firstly on what we mean by an institution. So Norm, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you to Inclusion Canada for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar. And as Jeff has mentioned, my name is Norman McLeod, and along with my friend and partner Gordon Fletcher, we co-chair the People First of Canada and Inclusion Canada Joint Task Force on Deinstitutionalization. I am a white male. I have white hair and a white beard, and I am wearing a dark blue navy shirt. And with that, I'll begin my presentation. So the task force believes that it would be unethical to advocate for the closure of institutions only to have people receive supports in smaller, segregated settings in community that do not support people to be full participating valued members of our Canadian society. One of the things that the task force did when it was established in 2002 was to develop a definition of an institution. So we believe that an institution is any place in which people who have been labeled as having an intellectual disability are isolated, segregated, and or congregated. So an institution is any place in which people do not have or are not allowed to exercise control over their own lives and their day-to-day decisions. An institution is not defined merely by its size. Families and people who have experienced living in an institution have been advocating for people with an intellectual disabilities to be fully included in community life and for the closure of institutions since the mid-1950s. So it's obviously been a long struggle, and our dream of having people fully included as equal citizens has not really been fully realized. Unfortunately, much of what we have developed to support people to live in community deny people their basic rights of citizenship, personal control, decision-making, and independence. Institutions, by their very nature, cannot provide an opportunity for people to learn, to thrive, and contribute to society. They isolate people from their family, from their friends, and from community. Institutions deny people the basic right to decide where and with whom they will live. And can you imagine for a moment what it would be like if someone told you who you had to live with and where you had to live? Rather frightening, isn't it? Institutions rob people of the right to make basic decisions regarding their own life. We believe institutionalization of people with an intellectual disabilities is against the rights protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Next slide, please. So why do institutions exist? Well, there are not many options for individuals and families. It is often assumed that people will stay in their family home forever, or that they will move into group homes or some other type of facility-based institution. People with an intellectual disability want to live independently and make their own decisions regarding where with whom to live. However, people continue to be presented with options that do not support their lifestyle of choice. People are routinely placed in segregated, congregated housing because it is the only available space that exists. People are forced to pursue these options, not because it's where they want to live, but because it's the only option that's available. there isn't enough affordable, accessible housing available in Canada. So the majority of people with an intellectual disability are unemployed or underemployed. Many rely on government social assistance programs to meet their basic needs. And social assistance rates across Canada are minimal, which in reality condemns people to a life of poverty, making it almost impossible for people to purchase their own home unless they have support from family, or to even rent their own apartment. In addition, the majority of people with an intellectual disability are unable to obtain independent person-centered planning. So planning that is separate from or independent from government and independent from the agency in which they are receiving supports. And the majority are also unable to access individualized portable funding. Rather, people are placed in housing models such as block-funded group homes, which limit their individual control, choice, and decision-making. And it's not what they want or what they need. Disability services and supports are not the same across Canada. People don't have the same access to the supports they need for independent living in a community. The vast majority of people with an intellectual disability do not want to have or do not have a home of their own, where they exercise choice, control in their day-to-day decisions, including the right, as I mentioned, to decide where and with whom they live. Unfortunately, in Canada, access to supports to live in community is not considered a right, but rather a social assistance program dependent upon the availability of funding and availability of spaces. As a result, tens of thousands of people in Canada are on waiting lists to get support. Now, they don't know if they ever will get support, or if they do, if that support will be appropriate to their needs. Many others have been placed in facility-based programs that are not of their choosing, simply because it's the only program that's available for them. Federal, provincial, and territorial governments must adopt concrete plans to ensure affordable, accessible housing and individualized community-based supports are available that enable people to live in their own homes. Canada must fulfill its commitment and its obligations in accordance with Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and Sections 7 and 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Diane.
Thank you, Norm. Hello, everyone. My name is Diane. I'm a white woman with short, dark, spiky hair, a little bit of gray in it, wearing a red blouse, and in the background, there is a white wall with a picture, I guess it's a drawing of my son, Robert, and just below, a throw pillow with the word home on it. So when we talk about inclusive housing, we're not only speaking about where we live and in what kind of housing, but also about how this contributes to create. We all know what we experience when we're home. We know what it feels like. It's that feeling of belonging, comfort, and security, what Jeff was talking about. And eventually, most of us go out into the world to create a home of our own, a place where we feel free to be ourselves, where we have control over everything that goes on in it, where we shape it to fit us and express our identity. Our homes really are a kind of refuge, that safe, comfortable place that we return to at the end of the day to recover and replenish ourselves for the next. Whether we need a lot, some, or no support with daily living activities, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities need to have access to the same range of housing options as everyone else in Canada has, so that they too can create a home for themselves instead of being congregated and segregated because they need disability supports, or that their income is so low that they can't afford what's out there. And we all know actually what inclusive housing looks like. It's the housing that we would possibly choose for ourselves. An apartment, a condo, a townhouse, a single dwelling, a mobile home, or a cabin. There's many options out there. And what makes these options inclusive are some important factors. So first of all, we would all choose where we live and with whom we live. Inclusive housing, in inclusive housing, you have control over your comings and goings. You have control over how it's decorated. You decide what you do with your day, and you decide what goes on in your home, who enters your home. People in inclusive housing also have the responsibilities, of course, that come with the freedom of running a household. You know, the things like laundry and housekeeping and bills and cooking and grocery shopping. And as Norm said, there's such a large number of persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities that live below the poverty line that it severely limits their housing options, especially it's even worsened since in the present housing market. So for housing to be inclusive, affordability needs to be considered. So of course you need to have, like what Jeff spoke about, subsidized housing and portable rent subsidies. They're critical. I think they're crucial to making a home of my own a possibility for everyone. These affordable housing options also need to be available in neighborhoods that are home to people with diverse life experiences, backgrounds, and needs, rather than being neighborhoods created around one factor like income or age or disability. Another factor is accessibility. Housing is inclusive when it eliminates the barriers to the activities of daily living inside and outside of their home, and the barriers to participating in all aspects of the life of the neighborhood and community. The barriers could be physical or social or mental. Housing, whether it's in a rural area, a village, a town, or a city, needs to consider proximity to community venues and or accessible transportation. This is truer now than ever, given the rising price of gas these days. When these are considered, it allows people to take part in the social, economic, and political life of their community. And this is so important because actually it's through their involvement and contributions that people with an intellectual or developmental disability are recognized and valued as full members of their neighborhood and community, just as it is for each of us in our respective communities. By making participation in the community accessible, this creates opportunities for people to foster a range of connections with people from their neighborhood, as well as those from different areas of their life, including their family and friends, where they work or volunteer, where they socialize or recreate. And being connected to people in their neighborhood and in the community is one of the most important contributing factors to the well-being of all of us, and in particular, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. It's actually people watching out for and helping each other that provide the best safeguards for them. And it's what allows them to live rich, full lives rather than having rules and regulations that limit their lives to keep them safe. I also think for housing to be inclusive, funding needs to be built in for in-home disability-related support needs. And this in-home support would be directed, of course, by the person receiving the support. This means they would have a say in determining what kind of support they need and get, who would provide the support, and how that support person would assist them to have a full life in their home and in the community. We also need to look at what are the possible living arrangements. Will the person have a roommate who would provide some support perhaps, or would they live with a friend, or some other kind of cohabitation arrangement? And lastly, we know housing is inclusive when people's legal rights are recognized and respected. That means that in addition to having choices and freedom, you would have persons with an intellectual or developmental disability actually sign lease agreements or have the possibility of obtaining a mortgage, or perhaps enter into contracts with different service providers that one would have when you live in your own house, like when you're purchasing appliances or you're getting cable or a telephone. And these things should happen regardless of the complexity of a person's disability. That means that some people might need some support in making those decisions and entering into the contracts or directing the support, but they wouldn't be excluded from the possibility of living in their own home because of this. The inclusive housing I just described is very much possible. In fact, like Jeff said, across Canada, there are numerous examples of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities actually living in their own home. And the video coming up talks about one story of a brother and sister who live in a home that they actually own. And it's our family's story. So Mark, if you could show that video, please.
All right, you can open that up. So there's all the instructions, Rob. There's your card, and there's your vote. My name is Diane Cormier Northrup. I live in Bathurst, New Brunswick, not far away from where my two adult children live. Robert, who's 54, and Lynn, who's 51. They live in a home of their own. Rob and Lynn both had normal births. We had no idea that there was anything. We get sent to the Isaac Walton Hospital in Halifax, and they do all kinds of tests, find out that it's something that's neurological. And I remember the neurologist, he said, for sure, it looks like he's degenerative. But he says, you know what? Just go home and have a normal life. I just thought it was, okay, that's going to be a challenge. We did everything that we could. Like, you know, we bought the boat, we went camping, got the tent trailer, and I just lived day to day. For me, Inclusion Canada is kind of like a point of reference, a place where I can go that's going to give me the information that I need so that I can make my dream and our vision for a regular life come true. How we speak about people and where we place people gives messages to the rest of the community. The next time I got involved with Inclusion Canada, I think it would have been 2010, 2012. Robert and Lynn, they have their own home. At that point, the amount of monies that they were getting to provide their support in home support wasn't as sufficient for what they needed. Social development said, well, you're going to, the only option would be for a nursing home. One day got a phone call saying Robert's bed was ready. When they said nursing home was where I thought if they go into the nursing home, they're not going to survive. That's what made me reach out to Inclusion Canada. I was scared. I was angry. I was, it was devastating. I really felt alone. And that when I reached out to Inclusion Canada, I didn't feel alone anymore. They said, oh, well, wait a second, we're going to help you. So they got involved. I went to Fredericton with a pile of this high. We got all the documents we needed together and we got approved. So they were secure in their home again. So when the boulders get put in front of us, that's when I know I can go to Inclusion Canada. Inclusion Canada is needed. It's a necessary resource. I mean, to me, it's as needed as the fire station is needed. It's as needed as a police station is needed. They're the first responders.
Hello again. So as you saw in that short video, even owning your own home doesn't take away one of the particular vulnerabilities that people with intellectual and physical disabilities face. Having access to the funding dollars for the disability-related supports they need for their daily living activities. I want to go back a little bit because back in 1991, when my son and daughter transitioned to living in their own home, they were pioneers of sorts. It was actually unheard of, or at least very rare, for persons with complex disabilities to own their own home or to receive government funding for that in-home support. At least that's the case in New Brunswick. Luckily though, Robert and Lynn had a strong group of family and friends who were ready to do whatever it took to make it possible for them to live their dream, which was to live in their own home. And for approximately 20 years, they did really quite well. And my heart actually still lurches when I think back to how we got so close to them ending up in a nursing home because that in-home support that they needed was denied. I still remember the call. And I remember I almost yelled back when she said, there's a bed ready for Robert. And I said, no, take their name off the list. That's not an option. We knew, we had the aunts, uncles, and cousins and friends that stood with us. And we didn't know what we were going to do, but we did know for sure that they were not going to live the rest of their lives in a bed in a nursing home. The life they had created for themselves was not going to be thrown out of the window. They were not going to lose their neighborhood. They weren't going to lose their friends. We knew we had our work cut out for us because we were going up against a government department that didn't see other options. And as I said in the video, we reached out to Inclusion Canada. And I want to talk a little bit about what that was like, applying for that extra money. We had to fill out forms, but of course, to explain the support they needed, we had to prepare a budget. It kind of made sense for me to do all of that, but it was actually the questions on the funding application itself were really quite invasive. There isn't a part of their lives that was left untouched, in fact. And I can't think of anywhere else in society where we would do that to anyone. Like I don't think I've ever, not even the tax man would do that. So it's dehumanizing for that to happen, and to be classified as a level 4 client, or to be categorized as a nursing home case, and needing to fit into the system's measure of how many hours. of care they needed rather than the system allotting the care. The actual process of preparing this funding application is also way beyond a regular person's competencies. Unless, of course, your career is being a grant or funding specialist. As a mom, I didn't have a clue how to align the language of our application with the programs and the priorities of that government department, or who to talk to in that department, and how to influence them, and what to say so that they would listen and understand. So we needed someone in our corner. So I was really happy with that. Inclusion Canada was there for us, so they could speak in support and help us defend Robert and Lynn's rights, and actually help the bureaucrats look at figuring out how to make this work within their system rather than defend the limitations of their system. And we prevailed. And to this day, like, they're still in their home, like it's 32 years later. But it's so unfortunate, and it's horrific that they're the exceptions. Institutions continue to be that only option available to persons. I personally know of 2 young people that are in their early 20s that just got placed in a large congregated setting with other seniors. And I think the scariest part of today's institution is that they're such pretty places. You know, society would be outraged if people with disabilities were forced to live in those large prison-like buildings. When you go into today's congregated or segregated settings, the entrance area is actually quite attractive, and there's often a really nice electric fireplace in the common sitting area and beautiful art on the walls. And when the public sees this, and they actually probably think like, wow, this is a really great place to live. Isn't that good? But in actual fact, while today's settings look really nice, the loss of freedom, the loss of identity, the loss of autonomy, as well as the abuse and the loneliness and neglect are the same today as they were in those old scary buildings. In today's setting, in that home that I just talked to you about, you're still assigned to a bed or a bedroom through a placement process. Actually, you don't choose where and with whom you live. And if you need assistance with toileting, for example, like my children would, you automatically need to wear a diaper. And there's no arguing about this. It's the rule. You need to abide by it, even though you could actually tell someone when you need to go. You're even no longer allowed to make decisions about what you eat and when you eat, where you eat, when you go to bed, when you get up in the morning. And the worst of it all is that everything is done for you or to you. There's not much, if anything, that's done with you. It's a lonely, lonely life. How you furnish and decorate your room must follow the rules of the fire marshal or the residence's rules, which, by the way, you have no say in developing. You even need permission to leave the premises, and of course, there's a curfew that you must follow, and you had no say in determining that. And in actual fact, the more mobility impaired you are, the more you spend your days waiting and watching as the world goes by, instead of having a life. You know, when the horrors of living in congregated setting made the news during the pandemic, I think it's the first time I saw, and I imagine you also saw, public outrage about the neglect and the abuse and the isolation and the loneliness that people there experience. But you know what? We need to keep this in their minds, because since the dangers of the pandemic have calmed down, so has the public outrage. Yet that neglect, isolation, loss of identity, loss of autonomy, loss of freedom remain in those nursing homes, those group homes, those special care homes across Canada, even the pretty ones. Like I said, I shudder when I think about what life would have been like if Robert and Lynn had accepted that nursing home bed. Actually, I would think they would not be alive today if they had. But with all the hard work, Robert and Lynn are in their own home, and they have the appropriate in-home support they need. Much like you and me, they look forward to doing ordinary things like going down the street to pick up the newspaper, visiting with neighbors, hosting get-togethers, running errands, going to the hairdresser, taking care of household bills, participating in the life of their neighborhood. And just recently they became pet owners, and so they're learning all about the joys and the responsibilities of owning a cat. His name is Chester, and he's bringing a lot of joy to their lives. It's a real ordinary life that Robert and Lynn have, but a good ordinary life. One that for the most part is actually possible because they live in their own home. So now I will pass it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks to Norm as well. But in particular, Diane, thank you for taking the time to share with us your family's experience and the inclusive life that Rob and Lynn have created and live today. So with any position statement that we have calls to action. So you might be wondering, where do we go from here? Well, we're asking our organization and you as individuals and families to call to action government. And Inclusion Canada believes that housing must change so people with intellectual disability can have safe, affordable, and inclusive housing. I'm not going to read them all in the interest of time, but they are on the screen. I'll highlight a couple. Firstly, government needs to recognize the right to live in the community. Public policy must also recognize and support this right. And as Norm outlined earlier, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, specifically Article 19, as well as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Sections 7 and 15, outline this right. And we need to hold governments accountable. We need to make sure that housing programs are inclusive. We're calling on federal, provincial, territorial governments to ensure they fund only inclusive social housing, and that governments continue to invest in social housing that might, they actually are investing in social housing now that might look inclusive, but in reality, sometimes it's not. And far too often, people with disabilities are being grouped together and segregated. So we're calling on all levels of government to close all institutions. And we're advocating for the savings of those institutions be put back into community care and supports. And the last item I'll end on for the interest of time is that we're calling on all levels of government to adopt inclusive housing principles when they invest or fund housing development. This needs to cover all of the 5 areas of inclusive housing and what we are defining as housing inclusivity indicators. The areas are support arrangements, dwelling, structure, person, and neighborhood. And we don't have time today to go over how these indicators work, but the 5 areas essentially establish separate indicators that actually can measure what we call housing inclusivity, which is the degree to which a person's home either contributes or presents barriers to their participation in the broader community. Next slide. So you might be asking how you can help. There's many ways. We can all truly play a part in making inclusive housing a priority. Think about your own housing situation or the housing of your loved one. What makes it a home? What makes it inclusive? What could you change to make it more inclusive? Work with your local, provincial, territorial association for community living to champion more inclusive housing. There's 3 ways that you can look at to influence change: personal efforts, community efforts, and political efforts. On the personal side, Just think about the people you have close relationships that you meet every day. And use those connections to spark interest and awareness. Talk to your family members, friends, or support people about housing inclusivity. Tell them what inclusive housing means. Educate them on what segregation and congregation and institutionalization is all about and why it's not okay. Within the community area, speak up and speak out. Look at where you can interact on a regular basis and how you can use those intersections to inform and mobilize. Think of things like your workplace, school, recreational places, places of worship, informal or formal organizations that you may belong to. Use your social media, your Facebook friends, to post things to inform them, to educate them about inclusive housing. Share postings from your local, provincial, territorial associations. Share from Inclusion Canada's Facebook and Twitter feed. We post daily information in a variety of policy areas that we're trying to influence change in. The more you share, the more people are aware. Finally, at the political level, remember that disability is a nonpartisan issue. It doesn't matter if you're active in politics or not. Talk to your local city councilor about why housing inclusivity is important for your community. Ask them how they will work to make it happen. Build a relationship with the political world. You can write your local MLA or your provincial territorial government representative. Call your federal MP. Ask for a meeting. Bring them a brochure. They're there for you. So don't be shy. That's why they're there. You can request a meeting. You can attend events that they're present at. There are lots of options to influence in this area. You can also join a political party if that interests you, to influence their policy development and election platform processes. To help a bit in this area, we've created a short, simple document to help people with an intellectual disability and their families, housing developers and builders and government funders to understand what makes housing inclusive. You can find this document on our website in English and French, and the links will be provided in the chat. We've also created a guide that you can use to take to government or to work with a local developer to help them better understand some of the principles of what true inclusive housing is. We'll also drop that link into the chat. I want to end on a couple of quotes from self-advocates, and then we can go into a short question and answer period. The first quote comes from Shane, who says, and these are self-advocates, who says, "What a home means to me is choices, to come and go as you please. I've been told that our house is a place of love and it's a home of choice, a place where you can put the key in the door and have full control of your life." Next, Corey describes a home as, "Home to me is where I can live in peace. When I wake up, I don't have someone right there telling me what to do, but I come in and I feel comfortable. My friend and I rented a place. It was our decision and our choice. And when we got that, it was exciting. There were tears of joy." And lastly, Gail says, "Home means to me having my own place completely free and relaxed, and I do the things I want to do." With that, I'll turn it back to Rachel. We can go to questions and answers. So do we have any questions, Rachel?
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to our speakers. So a reminder to our audience that if you would like to ask a question to our panelists, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We had so much good information to share today that we did run a little long. So we're going to have to just pick and choose a couple of questions to make sure we are respectful of everyone's time. So Norm, I'm going to send the first question your way. And this question is about institutionalization and what we can do at an individual and personal level. What can one person do to impact the closure of an institution? How do we mobilize as a community?
Well, I believe that people with disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities and their families and their friends have always been the people that have been instrumental in the closing of institutions. And I would say individually, it's important, as Jeff mentioned, to speak to your members of the provincial legislature and the federal government to let them know of your concerns. But again, I would say that it's the more people that speak out, the more people that speak out together. And so the single voice is becoming, you know, a large voice because governments typically respond to pressure. And so the more people that can come forward and speak out against institutions, I think the more apt government is willing to respond. So it's the individual plus the collective response of people speaking with their elected representatives that really make the difference.
That's great. Thank you so much, Norm. So we've got a couple of really great questions coming in here. So the next one, I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to let any of our panelists respond to it. So the question is, when we talk about institutions and closing institutions and moving towards support in the community, are we including the language used in the question is elderly homes, or I think we mean, you know, facilities that support people who are typically 65 years of age or older. Are we including that group when we talk about institutions?
I would like to maybe speak to that. I don't think that we're talking about closing nursing homes or places that house people who need that kind of a care. However, if I think back to when Robert and Lynn that was the option, they were 45 and 42, a time when they should have been helping me get into a nursing home. And yeah, I think there's a need for it. And I think the option needs to be there for people who want that. If I just think about New Brunswick, there's a big push right now to help seniors stay in their home for as long as they can until it's just no longer feasible. But yeah, I don't see closing them down. But my heavens, that can't be the option available for a 20-year-old who's just graduated from school and is looking for a job. That can't be the place where we're going to put them, you know?
Thank you for that, Diane. Okay, so we did have some other great questions come in. Unfortunately, we are right at our scheduled time to wrap up the webinar, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So on that note, I would like to, again, thank our panelists for their time and contribution to today's session. I would also like to let you know that we have put a link to a feedback survey in the chat. We would really appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to fill that out today and help us improve future webinars and events that we host. So with that, thank you again, everyone. Please take care, and we hope to be talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Happy Canada Day.
Yes, thank you.